notification here. All right, and we are live. Mr. Stern, for the audience that does not know you, feel free to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Everett Stern. I'm actually the HSBC Whistleblower. I'm also the CEO and Intelligence Director of the private intelligence agency Tactical Rabbit. And I also ran for the United States Senate in the 2022 elections in Pennsylvania.
That's awesome. I'm actually going to be going there this Saturday.
Great.
Yeah. So your whole story fascinates me because HSBC has been at the root of a lot of controversy regarding their money laundering, complicitness, if that's a word, compliance, right? Their compliance in money laundering, the fact that they're complicit in multiple operations. And I think just last year, the other year, they even were charged with it. They were fined hundreds of millions of dollars for it. And they've been at the root of a lot of shady stuff. And you whistleblew on a lot of that. So tell us the story.
Yeah, sure. So this is back in 2010. I started out, I think I was 25 years old. I'm about to turn 40 this year, actually. But back when I was 25, I just graduated business school. I was initially a candidate for clandestine service with the CIA for field operations, and I was rejected from that. And then I ended up joining HSBC. A lot of people thought I was a plant, actually, for the agency. I was not, but while I was at HSBC, I learned very quickly that they were money laundering for terrorists and drug cartels, and specifically Hezbollah and also Hamas. And I started passing information to the CIA. I did not go to the FBI initially because my boss was actually a former counterintelligence officer for the FBI, the New York field office. So I felt maybe the FBI was compromised. I don't have anything against the FBI or anything, but at the time I was just nervous about it. So I ended up going to agency, and then after that, I ended up going to FBI much later, and then I went to the SEC and a couple other regulatory agencies such as OFAC. And actually, I didn't file with the government until later because Reuters came out with a news story about me. And right before they came out with the story, the reporter said, you should file a whistleblowing claim with the government and to protect yourself. And I never even knew what a whistleblower was or anything, or how to file whistleblowing or anything like that. And that wasn't my objective. My objective was to protect the United States of America. And I mean, we're talking about billions of dollars in money was going to drug cartels and terrorist organizations such as Hezbollah. And specifically with having to do with Hezbollah, they were using that money to make the IEDs to blow up our troops, which was, of course, very, very serious. So I took part in stopping a lot of that. I tried doing everything I could to stop the transactions from occurring. Unfortunately, a lot of them went through. But yeah, it turned out to be one of the largest, actually the largest banking scandal in U.S. history, and they were fined $1.92 billion. But it was only 5 weeks of their pay, and nobody went. Actually, I'm sorry, 5 weeks of HSBC's profits. But nobody went to jail, and that was my biggest problem with the whole scandal, was that nobody was punished as a result of this. I mean, it was just a slap on the wrist, and that was it. Me personally, I believe that if you finance our enemies, especially terrorists and drug cartels that are killing people, especially our troops, I mean, you should at least go to jail for that, I would think. I mean, that seems to be appropriate to me. But I think what happened was, at the time, was the U.S. government was very afraid of another financial crisis, and they did not want. They felt that it would cause huge ripple effects for HSBC to be taken out of commission or to lose their charter or anything like that. So I think that's why it happened. They were just, they were afraid of a financial crisis. But after the HSBC scandal, that led to a number of fines against other different types of banks. And what's happened since then is this ripple effect where banks are just getting fined, and they're not, they're doing wrong things, right? And then they're being fined, and that's it, right? And it's just a cost of doing business now for these banks and financial institutions. That's all it is. These fines are just the cost of doing business. So the banks know now, okay, we're going to have to spend 300 million or 400 million, whatever they have to do every year to basically pay off the government to allow them to do these types of transactions. It's pretty crazy, actually.
Well, let's backtrack a bit because number one, I feel like your story is important because a lot of very recent events with regards to money laundering have occurred, including HSBC. Because the only thing I ever heard about them, including on YouTube videos, was they're laundering money, that they've gotten fined about it multiple times. And it seems like what from you're saying, that is true. So that as well as Pandora Papers, Panama Papers, Paradise Papers, which I'm going to get into later. But how do you did you, as the anti-money laundering officer, which I believe was your job title, something like that, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I was actually an anti-money laundering compliance officer.
right. So how did you determine what was money laundering and what wasn't in a lot of these transactions? What would that look like?
Sure, that's a great question. So, so OFAC comes out with a list on a regular basis, the OFAC Treasury sanctions list. So the Treasury sanctions, the U.S. government sanctions certain entities and individuals for terrorist activities or for drug activity, whatever. Right now there's a lot of Russia sanctions occurring, and so OFAC has a list of a whole bunch of names. So what I saw was that sanctioned entities on these lists, I saw the transactions actually going through. So, for instance, the Tajin brothers, they had a company called Tajiko, Tajco. So this company Tajiko, which is based out of Sierra Leone and also Gambia, and also it's really out of Lebanon. So the Tajin brothers are actually financiers for Hezbollah, so which is a terrorist organization, which is a branch of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. So what I saw was money going to them in these transactions, and I didn't understand how that was possibly occurring because they were sanctioned entities, right? And they were in this thing called a wire filter. So at HSBC Bank, they had a wire filter with all these sanctioned entities' names in it. So for instance, Tajiko was in the OFAC sanctions list. It was also in HSBC's wire filter. So it didn't make sense to me that these transactions were going through, because if the transactions were going through, then how's it possible? Because they're sanctioned, they're in the wire filter. So it took me a while to figure this out. And I was sitting there staring at the wire filter one day, and I saw that there were little dots and dashes in the wire filter. And I was like, what the heck is this? I didn't understand what they were there for. And then I found out that the wire filter is only for exact matches. So for instance, on the payment, if it said Tajiko, Tajco, the payment would go through because the wire filter was taj.co or taj-co. So they were criminally manipulating the wire filter so the payments wouldn't match and the payments would then go through. If that makes sense.
But who is criminally manipulating this? The bank or?
Yes, 100%.
So how do you know that? How do you know that they were the ones doing it as opposed to somebody else that maybe had an insider?
No. I saw him do it. I mean, it was definitely done intentionally. And I saw the actual wire payments. I mean, everything. I saw. There's a special system there called CAMP, which is the Customer Alert Monitoring Program. I remember that from 2010. But this CAMP program contained all the transactions and wires that were going through the bank. And I sat there and I literally went through this CAMP system, and I saw how the transactions are being manipulated, and that was a big thing that went to the U.S. government and to the CIA and also to the FBI later on. Yeah, it was definitely them, and that's why they were fined. I mean, HSBC admitted to doing all this stuff. They literally went in front of the U.S. Senate, and there were Senate hearings as a result of this, and they went in front of the U.S. Senate and they actually admitted to this stuff. They said, "No, we are guilty of this," and that's because they knew they weren't going to go to jail, and that's why they were, the company was fined, or the bank was fined.
But who specifically in what department was involved? Was it your department of money laundering? Was it someone higher up, like a supervisor? And if all of this is going on, what's the point of having a money laundering department? Is it just to avoid accountability? Because that's what it seems like it was for. So, you know, people can't go back and say, you know, oh, you guys weren't doing anything about it. But so that's what I would have my reasoning be. But why did this happen? Like, what department was to blame, really?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the anti-money laundering division, but it also went all the way up to Irene Dorner, who was the CEO of HSBC at the time. That was, I mean, this went all the way up to the CEO's office. I alerted the CEO's office to this problem. They did nothing. I mean, what they created, HSBC, when I joined HSBC in 2010, there were maybe, I don't know, 10 or 15 compliance officers in the whole department. There was no compliance infrastructure really in North America. There's nothing there. So they started building it out, but the people they were hiring were a bunch of idiots and they didn't know what they were doing. And literally nothing, they had a HSBC it was in Newcastle, Delaware. So it was this real rundown crap hole in the shopping mall, actually. And so I was in this shopping mall. It wasn't like some big bank building or something most people think of. It was in this shopping mall. And they had a huge customer service department where people would collect on credit cards, always credit card debt collectors. So what HSBC, there were hundreds of them. So what HSBC did was they sold their credit card division to Capital One, and they fired hundreds of these debt collectors and then rehired these people as anti-money laundering compliance officers, which was insane. I mean, these people had no idea what they were doing. I didn't even know what I was doing. I mean, I was 25, out of school. I was rejected from the CIA. I didn't know what I didn't know what I was doing with this stuff. I didn't even know what anti-money laundering was. I had to go to the library and check out books on this stuff and teach myself what anti-money laundering was and how it worked. But no, the entire AML infrastructure at HSBC was a sham, 100%, a complete sham, and it was just a card show. And it was a card show to trick the regulators. I never even saw a regulator there, but it was to trick the regulators of the U.S. government that, oh yeah, we're doing this great job. We have all these people processing alerts and anti-money laundering alerts, and everything's going great. And the whole thing was just, excuse my language, it was just bullshit.
So one thing I am interested about is in this whole debacle, were state actors involved?
Yes. I mean, you had state-sponsored terrorists involved. You had 100%. I mean, Iran. What I saw was Iran was heavily involved with this. There were a number of Iranian sanctioned companies that were involved. Russia, at the time, Russia didn't invade Ukraine at the time, but Russia, there were still some certain oligarchs that were being under sanctioned. But mainly Iran in facilitating these money laundering transactions, or these wires that they were going to Hezbollah. That was a really big deal.
So now, okay, so when you see, like with what you've seen, now you mentioned Russia, right? Were there any names that you can remember of oligarchs or whatever that were involved in this?
No. I mean, none that come to mind. There were so many names and so many companies, individuals involved. I remember, related to the Tajin brothers, there was Congo for Tour. There were a couple of these money servicing businesses, these smaller ones, MSBs. I know the Sinaloa and Los Angeles drug cartels were involved. Hezbollah, Hamas. It was just, but we're talking thousands and thousands of entities, and I mean these OFAC sanctions lists went on and on and on, and they were all doing business with HSBC, and that's because HSBC had the largest correspondent banking division in the world. So HSBC Bank was able to facilitate the money to get from point A to point B, and how they did that was, so for instance, let's say your grandmother, right, was banking, was in Sierra Leone, Gambia, right? So the only bank that's near her is Standard Chartered Bank in Gambia. So how are you gonna, if you're banking at Wells Fargo, how are you gonna get money from Wells Fargo to Standard Chartered Bank? So what Wells Fargo does is they have a correspondent banking relationship with HSBC Bank, who has a relationship with Standard Chartered Bank, And what HSBC will then do is then take the money from Wells Fargo from your account and send it to your grandmother in Sierra Leone and Gambia. You know, I don't know why your grandmother's in Gambia, but that's what they would do. And that's correspondent banking. They help other other banks will bank with HSBC Bank. So I saw transactions from JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank, Standard Chartered. I mean, all these billion-dollar banks throughout the world. I saw a lot of their transactions.
Well, now this leads me into one of my written questions: was part of the problem that there was people in power involved and implicated?
Yes. Looking back on the situation, I didn't know at the time, but the FBI director, Comey, was actually a board member. He was a consultant or some board member or something of HSBC Bank, which is a huge problem. There's a huge conflict of interest there. That he was on that board or had anything to do with HSBC Bank was pretty insane. I mean, Comey was the head of the FBI. Again, I didn't know that at the time, but that's something that came out later on, that he was part of it. So yeah, there were people complicit in government who, you know, also HSBC Bank was financing a lot of, you know, U.S. Senate campaign. That's what got me interested in politics, because I saw HSBC Bank was financing Senator Toomey's campaign in Pennsylvania. You know, all these people on the Senate Banking Committee, they were trying to essentially buy them off. It was pretty incredible, actually. Tremendous corruption having to do with HSBC Bank.
So when I also say people in power, I mean as in not just in the United States. I mean, that's very fascinating, though, that Comey was a board of directors for a notoriously corrupt bank. But is he still the board of directors? I should follow up with them.
No. I believe he's left that the board. I'm not sure what year, but I know he was an advisor, something along those lines. Yeah, but it's a definite connection, though, between Comey and HSBC Bank. And circumventing back to your other question, having to do with other countries involved or anything like that. Yeah, I mean, look, HSBC Bank had HSBC North America. Then there was HSBC Tehran, HSBC Moscow. There were all these HSBCs all throughout the world. So HSBC in Tehran, which is in Iran, that was run by HSBC Middle East, which is so HSBC Bank in North America had different rules than HSBC in Tehran, obviously, right? So, but the issue was, and that is a commingling of funds amongst bad guys, really. I mean, it's really incredible.
So when it comes to also people in power, I mean, isn't also just very, very wealthy individuals, right? So you know, like who were some of the people that were of just like maybe that you saw, that you recognize the name of, that you were aware of doing business with HSBC?
I mean, certain information the government was looking into. I can't name those people, but there were certain, for instance, again, going back to the Tajin family, the owners of Tajco. I mean, those are major financiers of Hezbollah. They have a lot of money. Those brothers, I know one of them was kidnapped by the United States in Morocco and brought back to the United States to face terror charges. But those people, I mean, those are major players. And Hassan Tajin is still around. I mean, he's sitting there in Beirut right now, helping finance these attacks against Israel, against U.S. installations in the Middle East. I mean, this guy's a major player. And he was very much, they were absolutely banking with HSBC Bank.
So yeah, so you mentioned Hamas, I believe in other videos, and even right here too. With regards to that, how does that relationship work? Because I again, like, Israel versus Palestine is an extremely complicated issue in and of itself, and we could talk for hours about that. My stance is just generally that it's a very extreme side, no matter what side you're on. And, you know, people shouldn't be dying in a war, especially not innocent people. So, you know, when it comes to that, the fact that there's a bank that's allowing any type of business with two warring countries is a little bit of, at the very least, a moral quandary. So legally, where does that stand? Is that allowed? Is that not allowed?
Yeah, so legally, I mean, I was in Israel after October 7th happened, and it's, you know, Hamas is a terrorist organization. Not me just saying that; it's a sanctioned terrorist organization by the United States. So it's by the U.S. government has sanctioned Hamas a long time ago. This was not something new. This is a long time ago, and Israel, again, I'm not going to get into the whole dynamics of it, but Israel has to wipe out Hamas. I believe that strongly. Hamas needs to go. It's a terrorist organization. They're against the United States. They're against Israel. So having to do with the legal ramifications of that, you know, Hamas is that there were funds moving into Gaza back in 2010 to sanction, and you know, to Hamas controlled entities, and that's illegal. You can't do that. So sending money to Israel is okay. That's legal. But sending money into Gaza, into Hamas-controlled territories, that's not okay. I mean, you have to understand, even though Hamas is the elected party in Gaza, they're still a sanctioned terrorist organization. I mean, the Palestinian people shouldn't have elected a terrorist organization as their, you know, as their political power. But again, going back to what's legal and what's not legal financially in the U.S. financial system, money cannot be going to Hamas. That is illegal. You end up in jail to the end. One penny goes to Hamas, and you're going to jail for a long time. At least if you're not a banker with HSBC Bank. I mean, if you're a banker financing this stuff and writing the check, I guess you're okay. The bank will pay a fine. But if you're a regular citizen and you send money to Hamas or a Hamas-controlled entity, you're done. I mean, you'll end up in jail for. I mean, the FBI will come after you for that.
So what was the ultimatum exactly? Because you said you told the CIA. What were all these various government organizations' responses? Because the CIA is, you know, kind of the lead people for international terrorism, right? The FBI does stuff too, but CIA is like it is the central intelligence agency of the United States. So what happened with them? What happened with the SEC, and all these other organizations that you reported it all to?
Sure. So, I mean, the CIA had great interest in what the intelligence I had to provide. I found out a couple of years later. I talked with a very senior intelligence official, a former senior intelligence official with the CIA, and what they told me was that my intelligence was definitely actionable in a number of intelligence operations against terrorist organizations such as Hezbollah and Hamas. And also talked to a DEA agent at one point that my intelligence was used by DEA in certain intelligence operations against the Sinaloa and Los Angeles drug cartels. So it was also, I heard from the FBI, they thanked me tremendously for my help. They said I did a good job. You know, no agents were mentioned in any of the news articles, which was great. You know, they had to remain undercover. And no, so it was a very positive reception coming from the intelligence community, coming from federal law enforcement. But you're right. I mean, the CIA is definitely the tip of the spear in going after terrorist organizations. Yeah, you know, internationally from a foreign aspect. And you know, they definitely, you know, welcomed what I had to offer and provide them. But I just want to clarify, I was certainly not working for them. I was self-directed, passing information to them, but I was never a CIA employee at any time.
So now moving on to a little bit, but continuing with the intelligence aspect of it, you now run a private intelligence firm called Tactical Rabbit.
Yes.
So what does your company do exactly?
Yeah, so we're focusing mostly now on cybersecurity, national security, and basically anything that encompasses national security. We also do various intelligence operations. again, we only work for, really Americans and the U.S. government. We don't have any direct defense contracts, but we're only on the side of the United States. We don't, we are operating in certain foreign countries, but again, it's a private intelligence agency, mostly comprised of former CIA and FBI agents. I started the company back in 2012. After the HSBC scandal happened, I actually went to go work as a waiter at PF Chang's, actually, at the Chinese restaurant. So I went from working at a Chinese bank to a Chinese restaurant. Now I was blacklisted from the financial community, so I had nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing. And I had the idea to start this business where we would do anti-money laundering. And Tax Grab also does anti-money laundering. We do, again, cybersecurity, compliance type situations as well. But I was living in this, back 2012, I was living in this 300 square foot apartment. I mean, I had a cot as a bed. It was horrific conditions. It was not great. Better than living on the street, of course, but it was definitely pretty bad. And I was working as a waiter, and I'll never forget. I went up to, I owe PF Chang's my life, because I was eating hot dogs every day because I guess all I could afford. And I ended up going to PF Chang's. I was in Rolling Stone, so I was becoming more famous, I guess you could say. But I ended up being in Rolling Stone, but I had no money, so it was weird. I was becoming more famous, but I had $0 to my name. And they gave me food. I told them, I said, look, I have an MBA. I'm not never waited tables for my life, but if you give me a chance, I'll work extra shifts, work whatever I have to do. And they actually stayed late at night. They taught me how to wait tables. They taught me how to do I didn't know what I was doing. I was probably the worst waiter they ever had, but I was definitely the hardest worker, but probably one of the worst waiters. But yeah, they kept me alive. And what I did was I started the company during the day, and I would wait tables at night. And it was funny because I had business meetings and things like that when I first started the company. And I would get my, because I knew people would recognize like Ferragamo and this and that. So I'll never forget, I used to get my ties off of eBay, used. So that's all I could afford, right? And, so it was, I fake it till you make it type of thing, right? And they didn't know I was waiting tables at night or anything. But I started it's good. It's funny. Back then, all I wanted was not to be in that position. I wanted to be in a better position financially, I guess. But looking back, I'll tell you, waiting tables was one of the most honorable and best jobs I ever had, to be honest with you. So out of all the careers I've had, waiting tables had to be the best. The people I worked with were great. And they gave me, the financial capital to be, not a lot, but the financial capital to start the company. And I actually started the company off of LegalZoom. And my mom also helped me. She gave me $300 or something to help me start the company on LegalZoom, because I had to incorporate it. And I did that. And and the company, almost 13 years later, we're still doing great. So the company took off. So I really built the company from nothing. It was really a hard challenge, and I'm very proud of what Tax Grab team has done and what we've all done. Just worked very, very hard over the years to try to help the United States as much as possible and protect Americans. But it's been a difficult road. I'm not going to lie. From a business standpoint, it's very hard starting a business from scratch and trying to build it. I know you're trying to build a podcast, you're trying to do your own business. It's very, what it's like. It's very hard to start something up and get momentum going and have the ground move. It's very difficult, but in the end, it was worth it though. So, but it's definitely a challenge. I'm not going to lie. People sometimes look at someone who's successful. I'm not saying I'm this huge success story, but people look at someone who's successful and they think it's an overnight thing, and it's not. It takes a long time to be able to turn something from nothing into something. A tree takes a long time. Once you plant the seed, it takes a long time for a tree to grow,
Yeah, absolutely. And I do actually want to circle back to something I should have asked, which is when it came to the aftermath of your whistleblowing, right? So at what point did you become public with it all? And what happened to you exactly?
Yeah, so I went public in 2000 um 11 2000. So I started 2010 and I went public in 2011. I was not fired from HSBC Bank. I ended up quitting. Um, but I wasn't fired from them at all. Um, but it was a very bad situation for me there at HSBC. I mean, they definitely gave me a very hard time there. I was demoted, I think, 3 times. Um, but yeah, the aftermath was I lost everything. I mean, that it was a horrible aftermath. It was not I was not rewarded for doing the right thing. I'll tell you that right now. I mean, it was a major hit. Doing the right thing and standing up for what's right. Um, I mean, it's very hard. I'm not going to lie. It's not the easy road. I say I would, if I'd do it over again, I would say yes without hesitation. But at the same time, it is very difficult taking the road less traveled, right? But yeah, so I ended up losing everything. I mean, I had before when I was working there, I was making 54.9 when I first started HSBC, which is a lot of money. 25-year-old, it's a lot of money, and a lot of money to anybody any age. But um, and I had a nice car, an apartment, I had a life, and then it all just went away. No one would hire me, nothing. And that's when I went to PF Chang's because I was desperate for money. I had nothing. And I was forced to start my own company because there were no other options afforded to me. There was nothing there. So yeah, I was forced into starting my own company and doing my own thing because nobody would touch me with a 10-foot pole, which is interesting because you would think people would want someone who does the right thing and who has, a moral compass. But you'll be surprised. A lot of companies are afraid of that.
So now that all happened, right? Now that you're doing private intelligence, one thing I noticed about was cybersecurity, and I've always wondered this about private intelligence. So you have former government employees mainly that work for you, but how does that work, right? Like, how do you gain information? Let's just say, cybersecurity wise, like, who did you hire? How did you figure out to hire them? You don't have to name names. I'm just saying, like, how did you go about doing that part, for example?
Yeah, so there's an old saying in business: if you build it, they will come. Right? Or I think that's from that movie with Kevin Costner. I think I can't remember the name of the movie, but it's true, very true though, a very true statement. If you build it, they will come. So I built Tactical Rabbit. I formed the website. I didn't really have the capabilities of doing what I said, to be honest with you, at first, but it attracted people. People. I was in the news a lot for what I did at HSBC, and that attracted a certain people. And I was approached by a lot of former CIA officers and FBI agents. They wanted to join forces, and they wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves again. And that's why I think Tactical Rabbit's a huge draw for a lot of former government officials because, um, you know, when they're working for the government, they're in service to the United States, and they're part of something bigger than themselves. And a lot of them don't want to go into this huge grind or money making machine, I guess you could say. I mean, Tactical Rabbit, they make good money, but at the same time, there is a purpose to what I'm doing and to what we're all doing and to the company's doing. Um, so again, it's attracting that type of talent, which is very important, not just for my business and private intelligence, but in business in general. Attracting talent is the name of the game.
So one thing I do want to ask about, and I told you I would touch on this later during the interview, which is now. So Mossack Fonseca was a major law firm which got its information leaked, which then became I believe, the Panama Papers, right? Then there's the Pandora Papers and the Paradise Papers, which are their own leaks. Maybe I'm mixing things up, but the three leaks, right? And it's a searchable database of well over 14 million records. I think billions of records, actually, but millions of billions of records, usually of some of the most powerful people in the world, former prime ministers and such, that have been known to work with this company that specializes in offshore banking and, making companies offshore, etc. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, there's a lot of shell companies out there operating offshore and also inside the United States. I thought it was awesome that those companies got exposed and that leak happened. I thought that was very important, from a public corruption standpoint, that people really very high up people got named. And I think it was in spirit of what whistleblowing is all about, and that's doing the right thing. And I think it's very good that if that intelligence got out there, especially in the private sector. I know for us in hunting down certain assets and identifying bad guys, that was a very important time in history. When those three scandals happened, that was very important because it allowed the private sector to get inundated with information that we wouldn't normally have, right? So it allowed us, it lighted up certain individuals for us to be able to target, to be able to elicit the necessary intelligence out of them and get that information back to either to the USG or get it to other members in the private sector for whatever it was needed for. Yeah, so I think that hopefully that answers your question.
Right. Well, one major player that you've been mentioning about is Russia, and that you've been alluding to it. So Vladimir Putin is very, well known in general. But one thing a lot of people don't know is that he's allegedly tremendously wealthy, right? And I think Elon Musk in an interview when he was asked, "Oh, are you the richest man in the world?" or someone called him that and he denied, and he's like, well, Vladimir Putin's likely richer than I am. And there's allegations that he allegedly is worth over $200 billion. Is he? I don't know. But some of the more interesting people that have been named in those papers include his alleged mistress, whom he allegedly has daughters with. But to your point about HSBC and Russia, why would the Russian government need to launder money as opposed to just putting it into a shell company, for example?
Yeah, so Russia has to do it, especially now, because of all the sanctions that are occurring against them. They have to move the money outside of Russia. They can't just have it within themselves because they're sanctioned. They have to get the money out some way, so they have to launder the money. They can't just put it into a shell. They can launder the money through shells, but they have to launder the money. So laundering the money conceals the source of the original, where the money came from, right? So that's the whole point of laundering the money. So because nothing can be traced back to the Russians. But the Russians are experts at laundering money. They're very good at it. And they are Putin. I have to agree with Elon Musk. I mean, Putin's probably he's up there. He's very powerful. Who knows what that guy controls? It's incredible to me. I know it's a Tactical Rabbit. We've identified a number of Russian-controlled entities on NASDAQ, and that we've had tremendous concerted effort to get rid of these Russian influence in our treasury system. From a cybersecurity standpoint, the Russians are targeting our infrastructure, local and state municipalities, water. It's a very serious issue. And the way they're able to pay people to do those types of ransomware and be able to attack the United States, not from a kinetic aspect, but from a cybersecurity one, they have to launder the money to be able to get it to those individuals. So it has to do also with the payment systems. I know me personally, I had dealings with Oleg Deripaska, who's a Russian oligarch who's very good friends with Putin. He's tied in with Russian organized crime. And I was working against Oleg Deripaska and getting information back to the USG, specifically the Central Intelligence Agency. I came out publicly about this. Unfortunately, I was dealing with Charles McGonigal, the individual who was arrested for dealing with Oleg Deripaska. Charles McGonigal was just sentenced to 5 years in prison. He was the former head of the FBI field office for counterintelligence. So he was a very powerful head of the FBI who was really working for the Russians, which is very bad. And Charles McGonigal was actually no one knew this for many years, but he was my POC. He was my point of contact. So I knew Charlie pretty well. So, and what was a shame was a lot of my national security intelligence that I was giving to the FBI was most likely making its way back to Oleg Deripaska and the Russians, which is controlled. Oleg Deripaska is definitely controlled by FSB. He's influenced by SVR, which is basically the Central Intelligence Agency over in Russia. But I mean, he is not, yeah, for Charles McGonigal to be caught with, I think, $250,000 of Oleg Deripaska's money is pretty bad. And that kind of goes back to the corruption we've been talking about, a lot of things throughout, peppered throughout this interview, and how the Russians are able to launder money, because back in 2018, the FBI was going to make a second run at HSBC Bank and find them again. And the person in charge of that investigation was Charles McGonigal. And I had a huge meeting with McGonigal's people at the New York field office actually about this in 2018. And I was under the impression, the prosecutors of Southern District of New York were there. I was under the impression the FBI was going to move on HSBC. They were pretty strong about it, and they didn't do anything. And I'm pretty sure, I don't have evidence of this, but I'm pretty sure Charles McGonigal squashed the investigations. He killed a lot of investigations having to do with Russian influence into the 2016 election. A lot of things like that. I mean, Charles McGonigal really screwed things up at the FBI for a lot of people for a long time. And it's good he's in jail.
So, do you believe, I'm going to ask about this, then I'm going to ask about Michael Flynn. Do you believe that you have been targeted at all by any state actors?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Hezbollah, the target photo came out on me. I know I was in a Lebanese newspaper. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm fairly certain in our dealings and working against the Russian government and also Hezbollah, that Hezbollah and SVR are certainly have me on some list somewhere. So is the Sinaloa and Los Angeles drug cartels. They're not too happy with me either. You have to understand, these people have long memories about, I mean, I really screwed up their operations, having to, going back to HSBC, and also things I've done with Tactical Rabbit. We have definitely put a wrench in some of their operations, and these people do not forget that stuff. They just don't. So to answer your question, it's yes. I mean, but they're not just targeting me; they're targeting anybody working against them or making a difference. I mean, again, I have this Winston Churchill quote behind me. You know, if you have enemies in your life, that's a good thing, because it means you stood up for something, right? So to me, being targeted by these people is an honor, because it shows I'm making some sort of a difference.
What things have you noticed with regards to being targeted, like strange phone calls, or like what are we talking about here? Type of targeting?
I've had numbers spoofed, calling me or sending me very disturbing text messages. I've had photos of myself sent to me, actually, which is pretty disturbing. And just wild things like that. Some stuff I'm not going to get into because I'm working with the FBI on it, but there's some very serious things that have gone on and continue to go on to this day. You know, threats to my family, threats to, I mean, it's very just, some stuff's pretty disturbing. I had one text message commenting about raping my son and stuff. I mean, it's pretty disturbing stuff. So I'm not going to get into it fully, but yeah, I'm not happy about it.
Right. Well, I will respectfully move on from that, and I wish you the best of luck in that circumstance. And to move on now to something you want to talk about, Michael Flynn. So I looked this up. You had a bit of a conflict with Michael Flynn, who was, I believe, a cabinet member under President Trump. I actually met someone. I had an interview with someone who actually knew him decently well. He worked for the DIA. So what happened with Michael Flynn?
Yeah. So with Flynn, he sued me for $250 million a couple of years ago, and then he's suing me again now. So I'm in litigation with him now. They sued me for defamation. So what happened was, I get into the full blown story of it, but the main issue was I was approached by certain individuals that wanted help, that were working for Michael Flynn. They were Flynn operatives, and what they wanted was help in trying to overturn the 2020 election in favor of Trump by blackmailing and extorting politicians, specifically targeting Brian Fitzpatrick. Senator Toomey was a secondary target, but Brian Fitzpatrick was a big one as a congressman in Pennsylvania. And when I was running for U.S. Senate, they wanted the use of my intelligence capabilities with Tactical Rabbit to help them. And also me, I had a lot of contact with a lot of high up politicians. So they wanted me to help in overturning the 2020 election, to help with these audits and then help the audits to go through. So I don't know if you remember, but about a year or so ago or 2 years ago, there were all these audits that were occurring across the United States, and Trump was trying to overturn that election. So Pennsylvania was a battleground state, and again, Biden's the president of the United States. I believe that then. I firmly believe it now. But these people that work for Flynn and Flynn himself adamantly believe that Trump is still the president, and Trump won the 2020 election. And look, I mean, Flynn is involved with right-wing extremism, the QAnon movement. I mean, it's very disturbing what this guy has involved himself with. You are correct. He was the head of the DIA. He was fired by Obama. But, look, I mean, there were a lot of top government officials that were friends, who I know now, who were friends with Michael Flynn, who are not anymore, because Michael Flynn has turned into an absolute disaster. Now, he went off the rails. I think it started with him in his involvement with the Russians, how he was accepting payments, and he was arrested by the FBI for lying to them and went to jail, went to federal prison, and he was pardoned by Trump. So, I think now what's happening is that I remember I reported the situation that in him trying to overturn the 2020 election to the FBI. I testified to the January 6th committee. And everything I've said to the American public has been truthful. So he's welcome to sue me all he wants, but everything I've said is the truth. It's not defamation. Truth is the ultimate defense. He can, there's been threats made to my family on his behalf. There's been threats made to me. They posted a target photo of my wife on Twitter, which I did not appreciate. It's just some real, I believe there's honor in warfare, or certain honorable actions you can take in warfare, and Flynn certainly does not believe in that. I'm not going to use your podcast to knock Flynn for, but I will say from an objective view standpoint here is that, I witnessed something bad that was happening that wasn't right and it was illegal. I reported it. I had to report it to the American public because I felt a domestic terror threat was imminent, and it was a very credible threat by Michael Flynn and his people, and trying to get Trump back in office. And I did the right thing. And like the HSBC scandal, I have these people coming at me again. I mean, I know it was a huge part of the Flynn organization now that's saying I'm not the HSBC whistleblower for whatever, they're just trying to hurt my credibility. But they're lying. I mean, but they're welcome to sue. Look, in this country, you can sue anybody for anything. So they're welcome to sue all they want. But yeah, I'm up against Trump money and up against this law firm's being backed by Trump. So I'm up against unlimited resources, you could say. But it's all right. I mean, the truth will certainly prevail.
So now that we're talking about Trump, and we talked a little bit about Putin, right? There is a lot of discussion about Ukraine, right? And the fact that we're sending hundreds of billions of dollars to a country, right? Just in general, a warring country, right? And a lot of people have various thoughts and opinions on it. What are your thoughts on Zelensky and the Biden administration sending those billions of dollars to a warring to Ukraine, who is fighting against Russia?
Sure. So funding Ukraine against Russia is imperative, and I am 100% supporting of anything that helps Ukraine against Russia. I think if Ukraine loses this war, the United States is in deep trouble. Europe is in deep trouble. Russia is not going to stop here. They're going to keep going and going, and they're not going to stop. And I think it's very important that Zelensky is backed 100%. I think any political divisions on this need to be, people need to cross the aisle on this one and they need to understand that this is democracy at risk here, and we have to make sure democracy prevails, and we have to back the people who are fighting for democracy. I mean, the Russians do not stand for democracy at all. They're working against it on a regular basis with disinformation and everything else that they're doing, and corruption. And look, I don't agree with everything Ukraine has done in the past or been part of. I'm not, but I will say this: they are fighting the good fight now, and the United States has to back them 100%. Just unequivocally back them.
Do you have any final words to the audience or anybody that might be listening?
No. I mean, I guess the only thing I would say is to your audience is just do the right thing. If you're faced with something that's a challenge and you don't know how the outcome is going to be, and if you put yourself out there, you're going to take flack, you're going to take heat. But as long as you're doing the right thing, and that's all that matters. And in the end, that's doing the right thing is all that matters. So just go for it, and don't worry about consequences. You just can't. There's always gonna be consequences in life for everything you do, but you gotta be able to look yourself in the mirror. And that's one thing I can say after all these years is that I'm able to look myself in the mirror.
All right. Well, it was great having you on. You're welcome back anytime. All right.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no problem, man. Yeah, I'm going to stop the recording. We'll talk a little bit after the show. All right.
Thank you.
All right. And we are